everybody, thanks for checking out this video. I'm excited to announce that I'm starting a new series that's going to be on my channel called Across the Board, and it's going to be a show focused around environmental impacts of our board gaming hobby. A place where publishers, designers, and gamers can talk about eco-friendly gaming. To get us started off today, this was actually a unique episode where I will be reacting to or responding to comments that I received on the Dice Tower Facebook group when I posted about my eco-friendly rating system for board game reviews. I also asked people, is anyone else concerned about the lack of environmental consideration in our board gaming hobby? I got a lot of responses back, and I was thrilled to see the conversation take off. Some of them were super positive. I'd say half of them were really positive. And then the other half were dismissive, and people left a lot of reasons why they're really not concerned about the environmental impacts of board games. So I wanted to address some of those ideas that came up in the comments because a lot of them were repeated. So they seem like very popular ideas that lots of people have about environmental impacts. So we're gonna unpack those comments today, and I'm not doing it by myself. I am bringing in some help. So let's get started. Today with me to help me unpack all of this, I have T from Hobby USA, and she is the games channel manager, and she's going to be our industry person that we're going to ask her some questions on.
I prefer they them pronouns.
Oh, they them. Okay. And then I have Derric Pennington, and he is a research scientist at the University of Minnesota, and he is a sustainability consultant, or he works in that field. So thank you, both of you, for coming on. First of all, we have to discuss something super important. I need to know what your favorite board game is. It doesn't have to be your favorite board game of all time. It can be your most played board game currently.
I always say that this is an unfair question because it's so mood dependent. And how many players am I playing with? How much time do I have?
All right.
But I will say the game that I am currently, I would say, like, most excited to play in a variety of situations would probably be Calico. It's from Flat Out Games. AEG did a co-publishing with it, and it's designed by the team at Flat Out Games. And it's a game where you're making quilts with little hexes. It's very different from Patchwork from a mechanism standpoint.
Okay.
But it's so cute and soft, and it has adorable art. And then it just makes me want to, like, be very mean and, like, it's like Brain Birdie, and then, like, you can be very aggressive in the drafting. And, like, I played with my mom last week, and she, at one point, I took a tile, and she was like, I didn't raise you to do that. And I was just like,
whoa. I love it. I haven't played Calico yet. That is on my to-do list because I love the Tetris style games. So yeah, you're definitely making me want to try it.
My favorite favorite game, I guess I look at it from I'm looking at it on the shelf, Agricola, just from what got me into the hobby. And so this is a sentimental game, but if I had to go towards I still remember, it's the first sort of pretty heavy game I got beyond the Catans and Ticket to Ride sort of things, and starting out, and I remember stumbling on, like, Scott Nicholson's video, and for learning Agricola, and that was it got me hooked on the media and the role of the media for helping learn these games in some ways,
cool.
And how to use the games. So yeah, Agricola, it's fascinating. I like farming. I'm sort of a wannabe farmer, so
I love it.
Currently, my son has me delving into a pretty, I guess, probably unsustainable game in terms of its sourcing, but Cloud Spire. So we buy chip theory games. So everything is plastic. That you can play the game in the bathtub with him if we have to. But he's really taking it into that.
For me, it's Spirit Island. We've been playing Spirit Island quite a lot, and my most recently played game was Firefly, which was awesome. We played for 4 hours and couldn't complete the game because it got too late, but it was still memorable, as it always is. This proves that we are true gamers, so we can move on into the task at hand of looking at some of these comments. And I do have direct comments from people, and some of them are taken a little bit out of context, not in the way that you're losing the person's intent, but it's still getting to the ideas that were brought up over and over again by multiple people about the issues that they have with this idea of being more eco-friendly in our gaming in our gaming hobby. So to get us started, we're going to start with number 10, and that is that eco-friendly board games mean that they will biodegrade and that they are poor quality. And the quote that I have is, "I'd rather not my games biodegrade on me."
I think the best way to address this one is, and a lot of these comments is, a lot of them are made in just kind of, ignorance is a strong word, but people just don't know. And there's also some stereotypes against sustainability and the idea of environmentally friendly products. There's a lot of different ways that you can have a product that is environmentally friendly, and those same products can be durable, high quality, and made to last without having a large impact or be not landfill friendly. So a great example is, I'm going to talk a lot about Haba and Haba's products because that's who I work for and what I'm most familiar with. But a great example of this is Haba uses, instead of using UV coating or other plastic resin mixes in our printing for paper materials, we use linen. Linen is actually a material that has been around for a very long time, and it is extremely durable. And it does well in a variety of conditions, and it also is landfill friendly in that if it does end up in the landfill, it will eventually degrade, but it takes a beating to kind of get to that stage. Whereas when you look at other printing methods that use plastic-based inks or mixes or whatnot to add durability or quality to a paper product, that product becomes, one, unrecyclable, and then two, it becomes unlandfill friendly, which means that when the product does go to a landfill, the paper resin in it will eventually degrade because it's paper. But any plastic that is less than that will become microplastics or larger chunks of plastic and be there for literally ever. And that's where we end up with microplastics in our water systems, to the point where certain water systems can no longer be drunk without going through microplastic filtration systems.
Yeah, that's
that was
great.
A big information dump.
Kudos to Hava for sure. Yeah, the whole my game's gonna disintegrate while I'm playing it, or I like to keep my games for 30 years, and they might disintegrate in my basement. And so more eco-friendly products are going to do that. I think that's been around for a while. Folks complaining about, I think, plastic bags when they became biodegradable. People were worried that their groceries were going to fall through the bags. But yeah, I think the biodegradable comment there. I think we're pretty good in terms of if we have a biodegradable paper stock, and I think removing additives and still having the same quality. That I think we're definitely have tried and true examples. And I think the linen touch, I'd like a box with the linen.
And actually, like, just the point that people were like, oh, it's going to be poor quality. Well, linen is very high quality.
And that's one example.
I love that option. Yeah.
One example.
So, I love it. Okay, so moving on to number 9. This was something else that a couple people said, and that is that board gaming is good for the environment compared to other hobbies and activities. And one of the quotes I had a couple, but this one says, by nature, 99% of board games are infinitely replayable, that they should be put above other hobbies as far as environmental friendliness.
Yes, but no. So then we tie back into the overconsumption, overproduction, and overthingness of literally any hobby. When you have board games are replayable, they're They're great from that regard. You can sell them. I buy a lot of used games. I sell a lot of used games. There's a great used game market. This is why the hobby is actually pretty sustainable in that regard. One of the ways that it's not sustainable, and I mean sustainable in like for the future moving forward, not like earth friendliness necessarily, is that you have to print a minimum of thousands of games when you print games. Even if you're a small publisher, you're printing maybe 1,000 games. If you're doing very, very small print runs through something like Game Crafter, which does print on demand, which is a fantastic alternative, by the way, you're going to end up with a lot of product, potentially, unless the game is a hit, that people struggle to get rid of. A great example of this is I don't want to throw any individual company under the bus, but I'm just going to go ahead and talk about First Martian. So First Martian was made by Portal Games. They printed a lot because they were assuming it would be as successful as some of their other titles like Robinson Crusoe. It had a theme similar to Terraforming Mars, which was really, really hot. So, and they had a lot of interest from a lot of retailers, distributors, everybody. So they printed a ton. It didn't do so well. And so they had thousands of copies that they just where does it go?
Yeah.
Where does it go when that kind of thing happens? And that kind of becomes, and that happens with like literally any hobby where you're manufacturing something. And if what is being manufactured is not landfill friendly, that's where you run into a lot of environmental issues. So it's like, yes, the hobby is great from a replayability, use plays, etc. But it's also, it does
a lot of
have
overconsumption.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely buy. Yeah, I mean, we buy a ton of games, but I think if we just focus on the waste side of the game, or sort of the end use of the game, and where that the sort of the grave notion of a cradle to grave. If we think about the cycle of a game, it's true. I think board games have a longer period of time that they're sort of in circulation before they hit the grave. But I always tell people, like, it's eventually going to hit the grave, or it's eventually going to end up in a landfill or in a dump. It may not do it during your generation, but probably your kids, grandkids going to be like, boy, Seafall still isn't hitting for me. I think we're going to get rid of that one, and I think if you got to throw someone over the, I mean,
yeah.
Well,
I think everybody involved with that production is fine with that at this point too.
I won't leave you out. I'll join the club there. But I still have my Seafall, so just.
I just got rid of mine like a month ago.
So, but I think that's a response I hear from a lot of gamers as I've talked to about sustainability, and I think it's what popped in my head as well. It's like, well, from a waste point of view, we within the hobby, the very that and the board game geek sort of community, if you will, there is a very tight a tighter circle in terms of goods going back and forth, and it is sort of like any hobby or collectible hobby where there is a lot of recycling and passing back and forth of those of the games or whatever the collectible is. But I think if we look at board gaming just a little bit broader and we start to think about the mass market games, like how many of you kept your whatever version of Monopoly that was given to you by Aunt Edna, how many of those, there a lot of those games are sort of white elephant presents. They're almost they're almost set up to be just thrown away. So you do have a high, I think there's probably more disposable gaming going on perhaps in the mass market community, especially these sort of theme games that come out constantly. That would be, if you kind of broaden it out, but my main point there is like it's eventually going to get.
Yeah, I think too, the commenters, like a lot of people spoke passionately about our board gaming hobby and like, how can you say it's bad? We're not using electricity, we're carpooling. Yes, board gaming is awesome. It's a wonderful, wonderful hobby, but it doesn't mean that we can dismiss, the impacts that it leaves around in the world around us. The next comment, my board games don't hurt the environment. Another thing that people said is that the impact is non-existent. And here's some quotes. We are a small niche hobby. And another thing was our footprint is non-existent compared to anything else.
I mean, that is such a bad argument for anything in life. Like if you are or have something that is essentially harmful in some way, because in some ways what we do is harmful, saying that it's okay to do that thing because it's not as big of a deal as other things you could do is kind of a bad argument.
Yeah.
So there's that. But at the same point, we are a small niche hobby. This is extremely true. But small niche hobbies actually can have a large impact. Printing a lot of games, putting them on shipping containers and shipping them across an ocean has an environmental impact. Also, the just like demands on natural resources, and then also the landfill factor.
Mm-hmm.
That does add up, and it is small in a bucket. But if everything in your life that you do and spend a lot of time, energy, and money on that could be considered a drop in in the bucket, those drops
Yeah.
add up.
What do
Yeah,
you
no, I
think,
think that's
Derric?
great. Yeah, no, I think definitely agree with that. It's easy at an individual level to sort of, be dismissive of the number of games you have having a major impact. It's a hobby, it's a niche in the market. Um, but maybe I take that back. I mean, as an individual, if I probably if you multiply all the games I have, if I did do my own accounting of my footprint, my board games probably are significant in terms of their contribution to my individual footprint. I think the challenge, though, even though it's a niche hobby, it's a growing hobby, and it's expanding into less niche places like big box stores like Target and Walmart and others.
Mm-hmm.
It's growing, it's moving, and it's definitely a direction it wants to continue to grow. I throw in the non-hobby games as well. They may have a similar production pathway or similar factories that they go through. But I mean, I think there hasn't been a real rigorous assessment of what are the impacts of the hobby game industry, and kind of breaking down in the same way that other, I guess larger corporations or larger industries have already had to deal with around disclosing their sustainability impacts. It's true in our hobby, it's really difficult to go to any of the publishers and find a disclosure statement on their sustainability impacts. But probably Haba,
We did
as
an
well as
environmental sustainability report this year. It's available on
right.
our
So
website.
I think that may reflect your size and your sort of, I mean, you're
Also, the
in
fact
comparison within our hobby, your
we're
size
also
Yeah.
is,
based in Germany. So Germany has a lot
yeah,
of really strict manufacturing laws. And so it's actually required of
Mm.
German-based manufacturing
right.
facilities. So Ludefact, Ravensburger, Thens and Cosmos, Amigo, yeah, just to name a few.
And
So
those publishers have all been pretty much in the forefront. I think, yeah, Ravensburger was using FSC certified paper. I think a game I have back from like the mid 2000s was 100% FSC, probably through Ludefact. Um, so, I mean, I guess I still feel like that impacts argument. It's definitely the production and the components and the paper and the sourcing of that paper, the plastic and how it's made and what it's made of. And then you have, just the production system itself in terms of, we are not even talking about sort of the social sustainability issues around human rights and labor, and then as well as pollution from the production, and then
Mm.
the big waste aspect, and then you have transportation. So I think I would, I think if we look at that relative to, I mean, if we compared Haba's environmental impact, and they've done a good job trying to mitigate that and compare it to Hasbro, yeah, those are not equal, and those are going to be very different absolute values. But
Mm.
it still doesn't say, Haba's still not turning around and saying, oh, we're small, we're not doing anything. No,
Right.
oh yeah,
they're taking responsibility, and there is a business case somewhere hidden in there for why they're willing
Why?
to do
Yeah.
that.
The other thing that came up a lot was that people said, my board games are on my shelves. They're not in the ocean or the landfill. And something else a lot of people said is, my board game collection will be passed down from generation to generation. So, what do you guys think about this idea that our board games are here to be loved for generation after generation?
I mean, I already said that it's eventually going to hit the landfill at some point. And probably in the production of your game. I mean, you're just thinking of the game itself. I think if you look, upstream and look at the indirect effects that produce your game. So what went in to produce the cardboard components, the plastic components, what was, the byproducts of doing that, and the co-benefits or impacts. Yeah, it's not just what's contained in that box and that's where it stops. It's you've already had these sort of that game's already had sort of past impacts that still linger. It's it's just sort of how you're thinking about the game in terms of its life cycle.
This has been joked about a lot, but one of these days, there will be a comprehensive board game about making a board game. Because a lot of this is...
I thought there was an attempt to do that.
Yeah. There's been attempts, but like they don't capture the full, But I mean, when you look upstream, just because it's on your shelf doesn't mean that it doesn't have an environmental impact, because you're putting off when it goes to landfill. It has a lot of all of the raw materials that are in the product had to get to the manufacturing facility where they were turned into the products. So if we're talking about paper, where did the trees come from that paper? Well, if you're printing in China, China doesn't get the trees from China anymore so much. They get them from other countries. And so those trees are often coming across large bodies of water, either from Thailand, further inland in Asia, or whatever. So you're talking about, okay, there's the transportation of the wood. Then we talk about
where the wood came from, right? Where it could be cutting down old growth. It could be cutting down,
Yes, exactly. So where the trees come from.
To be cut down. Yeah.
And then we have the conversation of plastics. Where did the plastic come from? Is the plastic a byproduct of another industry or stuff? For example, one of the plastics that's most commonly used in sand toys and stuff, I know this is not related to board games, but it kind of is, actually comes as a byproduct left over from making jet fuel. So in recent year, there has been a problem because a lot of the airlines shut down because of pandemic, or like reduced the number of flights. So there's not as much jet fuel being generated, which means there's not as much of this plastic byproduct to make these plastic figures. So they had to figure out a new way to generate this stuff. So then they were trying to figure out a way to generate this byproduct so that they could make the plastics that they need to make toys and games, but without having the primary thing, a jet fuel, being made. So there's environmental impact in that.
Wow. Yeah.
Like, and then you have the conversation about like shrink wrap, and then you have the conversation about cardboard shipping boxes. Also the cardboard boxes from the games. A lot of cardboard boxes are not actually made in the same manufacturing facilities that are producing the other components. Those components are after being made at a lot of different factories and then being consolidated into one. So the shipping costs of getting all the products to there. Then you have assembly costs, timeline, all that kind of stuff, the social discussion about employee rights, all that kind of jazz.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have shipping cartons. Your game gets put inside of another box, which sometimes is put inside of another box, which is oftentimes put on a pallet. Where did the wood from the pallet come from? Where did the paper products for the cardboard boxes come from? Then that pallet gets put on a container. Where did the container come from? We have a container shortage right now. Do you know where containers are made? And then that container gets put on an ocean carrier, and then the ocean carrier goes across an ocean using fuel and resources. And then it gets to your country, we're going to say America, and it gets unloaded from that container and then put into a semi-truck or on a train. Those also use resources.
Yeah. So there's a lot before we even get to the shelf.
Exactly.
And I think
inheritance.
And these upstream are difficult because, like I said, unless you own your entire, from production to shipping or distribution, there, for most folks, or most publishers, or they don't, it's really hard to track that whole, as you described it. I mean, to go through and try to track that down. But companies are being asked, if they do sign on to the new science-based targets, which are basically companies are being asked to reduce their emissions per, sort of their relative contribution to the total emissions that would keep us under 1.5 degree Celsius rise in temperature globally. And they're being asked to address their direct emissions, which tends to be like energy use, a lot of efficiencies, renewable energy. But then they're also being asked, and they've all kind of tabled it, but they're called scope 3 emissions, which are these upstream
Mm.
emissions. And so that's right now becoming a big issue. I work with, big agribusiness companies and retailers, and they're all trying to figure out how do we capture what our impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions upstream. And it is tough because they're asking those questions, but you're right. The average consumer may not be.
And one of the comments that I saw that I know isn't in your list, so I'm going to bring it up, is that it doesn't matter. People can pay to offset their emissions. That doesn't work. Like Derric's face says it all. Paying to offset your emissions doesn't help anything.
Yeah,
It makes you feel good.
Yeah, I think contextually, I think offsetting was seen as a way to, that works if you're thinking globally about emissions, right? And you're trying to get to a net zero globally, but it doesn't work so well if you try to apply that net zero or offsetting perspective from like a company. So a lot of companies are now setting net zero strategies, like we're going to have our emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, net zero by 2030 or 2050. Pick your nice round number year. But if you're just doing it as an individual, you aren't, you might offset your own your own contribution with that, but you might still be contributing to an overall net positive in terms of emissions. So you might be leveling yourself off to zero, but it definitely doesn't always translate to to a complete zero. But that is something that a lot of people have been talking about offsetting, and that's at least in the sustainability space right now, there's a pretty big debate around the utility of that, and there are a lot of issues around double counting. So the same firm counting the same reductions that are, they could say, well, I'm sourcing from so-and-so factory, so I'm getting this emissions, and then the same other companies will be like, oh yeah, I'm getting that reduction too. And so the accounting looks right from the firm, but you're counting, but in terms of carbon, you're counting the same carbon twice. And so anyway, that's in the weeds of the
yeah,
that's okay.
It gets messy.
No, that's a really good point to bring up.
But actually, I'll give it. I'll say another one that's not planting trees is the big thing too.
Yes.
So Panda Games, part of their sustainability strategy, and they don't have like official sustainability folks. They're kind of taking folks that are doing other things and putting them on sustainability and trying to figure that out. But I think they felt a desire to come out with some sort of policy. So I think they've teamed up with like an Arbor Day Foundation or someone, but they're going to put out. So I think for every 2,000 games they sell, they're going to plant. I think it was they're going to plant 100 trees, or no, maybe it's 2 trees. I think it's 2 trees for every 2,000 games or something like that.
Oh, do you know how cheap it is to plant trees?
No, here it is. They're going to plant 1 tree for every 1,000 games.
Oh my god.
That is a Panda Games policy
ever.
You know how easy it is to plant trees? Oh my god.
But that gets into the same issue too of like, how long is the tree going to stay there? I mean, a tree is only, it definitely can suck carbon in, but then, there's always this issue of longevity. And so it's sort of a, so I mean, it's great to talk to Hagba, but I think our industry as a whole is still trying to, I think outside of the Habbas and maybe the other German-based.
I would just say all German-based companies.
There's sort of a stumbling, and I think the pressure. I would like to hear more from some of the other publishers in that space, but I think there's more of a pressure coming from these newer markets they're getting in. That was the impression I got talking to Asmodee a while back. It's not a pressure they're feeling within the hobby as far as like the consumers, but it's definitely something they're feeling as they're going forward. And Panda did say that they were getting more and more, it was more common to have a publisher ask, well, what are the sustainability options? And right now all they can offer them is wafer seals instead of shrink wrap, which are those little, I guess,
stickers,
like horrified, like a lot of the the
Ravensburger.
games from yeah, this is Ravensburger. Yep. So like all the Prospero Hall games that have, I think Ravensburger is a part of that. So that's one thing Panda's offering, and then they're offering paper wraps on cards instead of plastic. You know, cards coming in shrink wrap. They're doing, but that's all their offerings they have. So it sounds like Kaba has a lot to inform folks on in terms of
Well,
at least
it's
production of cardboard and wooden
It's-
product, wooden
it's a-
pieces. Right?
it's a paper sourcing issue from Germany has specific requirements, and you have to do the things. So Ludofact, Ravensburger, Amigo, everybody that prints in Germany does this. So Hub is not unique. That's just where I work from. So that's the knowledge I have. I'm like, where do I start? Yeah, there are options that you can do. The easiest one is starting using recycling paper, and then make sure that your paper products are not mixed paper.
We can keep moving on because I think we might cover some of that a little bit more. But then the next point on the list was that games are expensive already. Actually, I'll just quote what people said. My biggest concern would be access to the hobby. Cardboard, plastics are incredibly cheap. Other source materials, I fear, would increase the cost of manufacturing. Someone else said it would make it unaffordable for most people to purchase games. Unfortunately, that's the problem. It's already unaffordable for many.
That's a weird. I mean, that's something that that's a tough one. The affordability in board gaming. I mean, when I started 15 years ago, you know, buying a board game over $50 or $60 or a $75 board game was just crazy to think about it. There weren't that many. I think actually Imperial Assault kind of is one of the first games I remember from Fantasy Flight Games, which is the small sort of, you know, miniature tactical game around and campaign style game around Star Wars universe, and it had a ton of miniatures, and it sold for $100 in this big box. And I remember that being a kind of a watershed moment. And I think now we've moved into, you know, I haven't seen the distribution, but to look at prices maybe pre-2000 of board games on average and see that curve and then compare it now, I would say that means probably increased 50, maybe 100%, the mean, you know, the average board game price. So we're, you know, I think definitely hearing people say, you know, I am buying a product I want to keep forever. And so I think folks feel like they're paying a premium already for something that is, especially those higher up, you know, Kickstarter or these other, you know, these, you know, over $50 games. And it's true, if they're going to cost more, or you have to reassess how much the industry, I mean, the industry's on pretty small margins, but I don't know if that's across the board. But, you know, where are there margins to move and bring in sustainable products, you know, for the $100 game or the $200 Kickstarter?
So board games are a luxury hobby. Just gonna put it out there. Board games are a luxury hobby, and there are board games that are affordable and can be made with sustainability in mind, that are still affordable. It can be done. It has been done. There are decisions that can be made to make the paper products in a game recyclable. You can get mixed paper sourcing. You can buy FSC sourced paper. The modifications that need to be made are minimal, and what you lose is maybe your shiny UV coat graphic on the front. That's an aesthetic. That's one example of how to make the box more recyclable. In some ways, the cost of UV coating is the same as doing recyclable paper instead. Yeah, and I would say on my side, the getting people into the hobby and all that kind of stuff and making it affordable, there are games that have done insanely well and do a great job of getting people into the hobby, and they are not cheap. Wingspan, Root, those are the two biggest ones right now for bringing people into the hobby, and they're not cheap. So
True.
that's like a thing. If you're talking about games that are at Target or whatnot, those are the games that are more likely to bring people in, outside of like the niche hobby. And I know the margins on a lot of those games. They can be made, like, there are decisions that you can make in the manufacturing to swap certain things out to make the game hit those price points without sacrificing quality.
Yeah, one question to that about price, and I don't want to put you on the spot as Haba, but I mean, I know, you know, I've heard several parents, you know, you don't see Haba necessarily in Target or mainstream. It those board, you know, Haba is probably 100% or more than a typical Hasbro Candyland. I don't know, my daughter's Candyland, some crazy price, like $9. And it had paper thin little cards in it, and
Yeah.
anyway, but I mean, it would seem like you have an example in children's games with, you know, Haba having you know, a differentiation between its games in terms of, you know, what it cost, you know, your production costs, what you're considering over your biggest competitor probably would be Mattel and Hasbro. Well, I mean, there's other within
in the
hobby,
US.
I guess.
Yeah, in the US, our biggest competitor
In
is
Germany,
actually,
you would have there's probably other kids games that are more like
yeah.
Haba. And I'm forgetting the other brands, but I've seen those too. But
so in the US, Haba's biggest competitors are Peaceable Kingdom, Blue Orange. One of the things with Haba is they're a company that looks to making products for children. They believe in children and helping make high quality products that will last generations and also will be meaningful for you and your children to play, and also will like support the growth of your children's like life, cognitive skills, physical skills, gross motor, etc.
the Game of Life doesn't do that.
No, I mean, they do work on economics. Anyway, but part of that whole mission statement, and it's literally in the Haba mission statement, is we look to help and make good, high quality products for children. And that includes making products that make sense to support that child throughout their entire life. So if we're making products that basically help degrade the planet, we're not thinking of that children's further, like later in their life.
But the next pervasive idea is that all our board games come from China. So unless we're going to stop getting games from China, like full stop, there's no reason to have this conversation because what can be done? So here's some of the quotes. Almost all the packaging and production is done in China. You can preach all you want to us in the West, or like, I guess they're from, I don't know where they're from, but unless you find some way to change the business practices in China, nothing can change. I have a comment here I got actually on my video that someone left, and they said, if you're truly concerned, you should never buy a game made in China. They don't use any recycled materials. Their factories are some of the most bad offenders of pollution. The paints are always lead-based.
So I just grabbed however many games this is closest to me. None of them are made in China. Let's see here. Hang on a second. This one is made in the Czech Republic. This one is made in the Netherlands. This one's made in Germany. This one was made in, oh, I just saw it. Made in Germany. It's on the side.
Okay.
This one is made in the Czech Republic. And this one's made in the Netherlands. We have games that are made in Bulgaria, Slovakia, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark. I've also made games in Poland. Games are made in US. Did you know that all the Catan sold in the US were actually being printed in the US? Like, the idea that no, not all board games are made in China. Some of the product assets might be made in China, but usually it's a minimal amount.
I would say probably the proportion. I mean, I would say the number of games being made solely in China has probably increased over the past decade.
I will say
it's not 100%. It's not.
No. And one of the things, one of the things that increased it was Panda. So Panda and Longpack are both companies that were born. Panda was actually like literally started to make board games for Kickstarter companies. And so a lot of Kickstarter companies that use Panda are producing in China because that's where Panda is. They're actually a Canadian-based company. Their CEO and founder is in Canada, but they do own the factory in China. His family owned a paper company, and so he was like, hey. So there's that. Longpack, similar thing. A lot of smaller components might be made in China, but for the majority, it's really like, if you start talking about like Hasbro and stuff, even they sometimes produce games not in China. It's not as typical as people might think. It's not a one and done. A lot of Kickstarter companies do use China,
Hmm.
but
I
it's
think
not the end
on
all.
the
Okay.
yeah,
I
it
think
does seem to
that's,
be on
yeah.
the publisher side of it. I mean, which and how they're. It definitely seems to be a very Kickstarter. I would say for sure that those, and I think a game that has a high percentage of plastic is probably more likely. Maybe I'm out on my, but there does seem to be
I'm
a, like
just-
they could a high. I mean, maybe not all plastic, but I mean high
A
proportion.
lot
It
of
does seem,
plastic.
and maybe
Yeah. They have the
yeah.
best plastic.
But I'm thinking
Well,
of
Okay.
it would be
Well, maybe
interesting.
not.
like this game is literally all plastic cards,
It's
so
all
I don't
plastic.
know if I would. That was
Okay.
made in the Netherlands.
Okay.
But obviously the drive there is probably around. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I mean, there's probably lower margins for what they're wanting to.
Yeah. I just think
That's the thing.
a lot of people think that there's no other option.
Yeah,
And
which
unless China changes, we don't have any say. And I think that's the argument that was pervasive in the comments.
and that's just a misunderstanding. Most board games are not made in China. Most Kickstarters, probably yes.
And
And
there are a lot, but not
And fantasy-like
every single
games.
game. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
fantasy, yeah, but certain publishers have deals and they make and publish in China. But there are 5,000 new board games made every year. As opposed, like that was the number from 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Not every one of those was made in China. I would even hazard to say that maybe half, which is most, but like not every game is.
What if we went by volume? I would say probably between Ludofact and Panda, probably by volume, are probably the
Similar.
two neck and neck. I would say probably in terms of
Gotcha.
total
Yeah.
unit, in terms of units, because I know the Ticket to Ride comes out of Ludofact still, like it's made in Germany, except for the plastic trains come from China. They told me.
So if you, it's a really hard way. I don't want to get too into it because if you start thinking about the number of games in the U.S. alone and the market that we're printing and bringing in for the U.S., is maybe China. But if you start looking at a global scale and you look at the games that are being sold in Europe, a vast majority of those are actually made in Europe. And board gaming is actually bigger in Europe. So, and then there's Taiwan. Taiwan is huge for board gaming right now. They produce their own games too.
Right.
So
but if we want to look at impacts, I mean, if you want to look at the impacts, we would eventually you want to kind of just focus on the units and where they're produced, I guess, or the total, not like where they're coming from. And if they're most, I mean, that would, I don't know.
So, and that's the thing, we don't know.
Yeah.
Nobody, we haven't sat down and done those numbers.
And
but
I want to defend China a little bit and just say it's not sort of a broad brush that every factory or and I'm sure Panda or others would get on and say there's definitely a diversity in terms of environmental consciousness or social consciousness, and it's again this issue of just it's very complicated. We have contractors and subcontractors, and it's
and
I agree. I agree.
Well, the other thing is like, unless you find a way to change the business practices of China, well, you can. So, I mean, to bring my own work into it, we produce some games in China sometimes, and we hold them to the same environmental standards we hold our German print manufacturing facilities, and they hit those goals. So unless they're blatantly lying on like customs paperwork, which I don't believe, they are just as capable as producing high quality paper, mixed recycled paper products from sustainable forests as Germany is. Like,
that's a great point.
You can do it.
Have products from China,
Yeah, for a while there, we were printing Rhino Hero in China. Like, now it's being printed in Bulgaria, I believe. But like, because we got a better quote. But like, you can do it. You can do it as a publisher, and you can work with a manufacturer to make it happen. It's just whether or not the publisher wants to. And then if the manufacturer can source it, they can source anything if the publisher really pushes for it. And you just kind of have to shop around, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And a lot of small indie publishers just don't have the time.
And we actually touched on this a bit already, and that was the idea that Board games are mostly recyclable. And I have a quote here. There is a small amount of plastic shrink wrap. Perhaps that could be cut down. But in general, board games generate very little trash compared to most other consumable goods. And someone else says, I put all the leftover components from punch boards to shrink wrap and packaging materials in the recycling bin.
So
Recycle the shrink wrap.
yeah, certain
Yeah,
places you
someone
can,
pointed
certain
that
you
out.
can't.
Yeah.
This goes back to, there's a thing called wish cycling, where
Yeah.
you put what you wish is recyclable in the bin, and then what that does is it contaminates that batch. And if there's enough contaminants in the batch, they have to throw away basically that entire truckload of recyclables that your bin went into. So one, don't do that. Two, make sure you look up what your recycling company can actually take and follow those rules. And three, unless you are absolutely sure that that punch board is 100% paper, don't put punch boards in the recycling bin. A lot of companies use plastic in their inks, and so then you're putting microplastics in the waste stream that ends up in the water, in addition to contaminating that paper product recycling facility, which makes a bad batch. So don't do that.
Yeah, agreed.
That's probably something that should be, more communicated more broadly, because I would say a lot of eco-conscious gamers are trying to mitigate their guilt through recycling
everything. Yeah.
You can't.
It's true.
So there is a company called there's a website called howtorecycle.info that is kind of like pushing companies to start putting basically how to recycle or dispose of different elements of the packaging and or product. And if you are a publisher watching this video, I highly encourage you to look into that information. And I will say right now, Target actually requires it of a lot of their products. This is how I learned about it, because Target requires it. If I'm not at Target and I see a product that has that information, even if the information isn't information I particularly like, I am more willing to buy a product that has gone through the effort to put that information out for me, to make it more clear.
All right, the next one, the idea that this is a political issue and it doesn't belong at the gaming table. That was put out there a couple times.
This isn't political.
I agree. That's what I said.
I don't care who your plastic voted for.
It shouldn't be, but I guess I would say
people
that
are turning it into one. But
I would say it's been from climate change to and environmental impacts in general. I mean, there's at least in the U.S., we have political parties who that platform around environmental justice and environmental, is pretty. It's great in some places around, say, like hunting and fishing, but it gets more black and white on some of these other issues. And you're right, it shouldn't be. I definitely agree with that. But I guess that is part of the challenge. We do a lot of work also trying to engage with farmers in the Midwest to adopt more sustainable practices, and it's often, even if the economics are aligned and whatnot, it can be just a political perspective, either from a libertarian point of view of like government shouldn't be telling me or business or private industry what to do, or it's a perception of, unfortunately, that polarization. So I guess I agree with T that, and totally could argue and advocate and agree, but I think it is,
for some people, it's
acknowledging we're in that space of how to communicate to those folks.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So the next thing, and this is the last big point, lots of people said that this is just a blip on the map as far as things going wrong in our environment, and there's much bigger issues to worry about. Some of the comments were actually really thoughtful, and I really want to address it because, like, here, I'll just read what some more of them said. There are more pressing environmental issues to address than the carbon footprint of board games. I'm into wood pieces and more than minis personally, but I think activists should prioritize other fights. And someone else says, it doesn't have a zero impact. It still took energy to create the product, and then eventually the plastic components will end up in a landfill. But board games are the least of our concerns. And for me, when I hear these sentiments and, it's a drop in a bucket, it's a blip on the map, I get this in every aspect of my life, that I put effort into being more environmental friendly. If I tell someone like, oh, we're trying to buy, organic cotton, or we're trying to, use less fuel, so we got an electric car, whatever it is, whatever we're doing, someone will always say, yeah, but, it's just you, like, what difference are you going to make? Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, how do you guys feel about that? Do you struggle with that same
Well, I think
discouragement?
that rationale, yeah, I think that rationale of like whether an individual can make a difference, and that sort of that argument, and so that, I mean, it's a reason we have such low voter turnout. I mean, partly, I mean, you have a lot of folks who feel disenfranchised, or just not, or see not a value in their vote. And so I think in a lot of aspects of life, people feel they're not going to have a huge impact, or they don't see the value of that individual. And part of it's recognizing the earth isn't looking just at your vote or your contribution. It's winning everybody's contribution. So I would also, if I wanted to be more practical about just board gaming, and being, wanting to be dismissive because it's a niche or whatever, I think you have to realize that the supply chains that board gaming leverages in terms of raw materials, be it plastics or cardboard, paper pulp, I mean, these are, we're feeding into supply chains that, several other, goods are made from. And so we could still have some influence in how those goods are thought about, maybe the technologies for those goods, because, the plastics that go into our minis, are probably not different than, some plastics used in other, maybe larger scale manufacturing goods. But yeah, and then obviously paper, cardboard, and paper stock, I mean, and plastic. Yeah, those are not, I guess my thing, we look at the raw ingredients, maybe we don't use a lot of those, but those are huge markets. I mean, those are huge, those goods have huge impacts. And the possibility that, we could influence the other way around, so we could influence the other producers, the other,
we do. So we actually do influence them. So right now there is a paper shortage. So a lot of board game companies can't get paper right now. And so they've been finding other sources, and a lot of those are drying up as well. So, but I do know for a fact that there is a certain company that started making recycled paper, and hobbies started purchasing from it. And then that company was able to grow, and then other industries started purchasing paper from it, because they saw there was now a company making very high quality recycled paper that was out there. And so other industries were like, oh yeah, that's good, we do want that. And they were able to do it. Another way that the board game industry has absolutely affected other industries is boxes. So do you know about the big board game box problem of 2016?
I do not.
I wonder if Derric does.
Specific problem. No,
So,
I know there's always been grumbles about the size of the box. But,
so this is an entirely different problem. So when they were trying to print Catan in the US, they ran into a problem because consumers hated the boxes that were being manufactured in the US. The quality of box just wasn't quite there compared to other games that were printed in this case, China. And they were very flimsy, yeah. So the reason is because it takes a special kind of machine to to assemble the boxes. You can get the paper, that's fine. It's the folding of the boxes, and you have to have a certain amount of pounds per pressure to like clamp and fold. And it's a specialized machine that was actually made and patented in China. Well, because of certain people doing certain things with trade things, you could not get that machine in the US. You also could not have the parts of that machine shipped to the US to assemble it. So that's a whole nother thing. We're not going to go there. We're not going to touch that. So the way that these boxes were being printed is they were being printed and then they would ship the empty boxes across an ocean so that they could be assembled in the US or Europe or whatever. But the way that these boxes were being manufactured and the reason people loved them so much is because they were actually being printed, or not printed, folded and assembled on the same machines that were folding and assembling iPhone boxes.
Okay.
So the Apple factory, because the way that Apple worked, they had downtime between print runs, and every like day or 3 days they had a downtime where they could not do the Apple boxes for some reason. And so this company was very smart and they were like, we'll just like we'll sell that extra machine time. So they did to the board game industry. And so the board game industry started printing boxes. Well, very quickly, Kickstarter boomed. A lot of people loved these boxes. They needed more of these boxes. The US now demanded these boxes because the US printed boxes weren't good enough. And so they had to figure out a new way to make more of these boxes that didn't depend on using the Apple box machine time. It wasn't actually an Apple-owned company. I want to be really clear on this.
Right.
Third-party company that does the Apple boxes as well as a lot of other boxes. So a new company started making these boxes. Do you know what this company is? It's Panda.
Ah,
That makes sense.
Yeah.
so that's where that came from.
It's not where it came from. They did a lot of other stuff, but that is one of the ways that they help distinguish themselves.
Oh, okay.
So
And kind of got their foot in the door in the board gaming. Is that like how the
But
story
is it
goes?
there's a much bigger story.
Okay.
I actually did an interview with the CEO and founder of Panda at one point. It's on my YouTube channel. But the background history is a lot more. But that's just like one example of where they saw that they could come in and do something specific with their family company. And they made Panda a new company, which is, I believe, a subsidiary of the family company, or it was originally, to do board games. And they're thriving. And now there's the very big company around that. And so we did make a dent in the box industry because then there's other boxes and things. And now in the US, because people didn't want to do this anymore, there are actually new box making machines, different types that do make the higher quality boxes. So you can manufacture in the US and get nice boxes now too. So that's another way that we have new, better boxes in the US as well. So that is where we affected the box making industry in the US. Okay. Because board games aren't the only ones that use these style of boxes. So we are probably one of the only industries where we care about the box and lasting for a very long time, but we're not the only ones that do that. So anyway, that's story time with T.
I like that story. All right. Well, I just want to thank you both for coming on and chatting with me about these issues and bringing a lot of light to some of the thoughts around the environmental impact of the board gaming industry and our hobby. So thank you. And
yeah, thank you.
Do you guys have anything else you want to say before you leave?
It's really easy in your daily life as a consumer to just ignore everything behind a product when you pick it up off the shelf. And that's kind of by design. We wanted society, especially in Western society in America, wanted to make life easier for people. Make it where, you don't have to do this yourself. You can just literally buy it and it's nice and pretty and all this other stuff. And so we've come a long way and it's very convenient and it's become extremely, it's so ingrained in us now to just pick it up and buy it and not think about anything else. And we haven't had to do that for probably a couple generations. And now we're having to think about it. Yeah. And it goes beyond just board gaming. And so it is a cultural shift that is happening and is going to continue happening. And it does have effects in all areas of our lives. And for a lot of us board gamers, this is just a very big part of our life, which is why it's coming up for certain people. So I would say if you haven't, look into wish cycling. If your first response to any of this was not to be extremely defensive in an angry comments kind of way, and you are willing to learn, there are so many ways that you can have an effect, a positive effect on the environment and sustainability, and you can make decisions as a consumer that aren't hard. They don't reduce what you're getting. They're not a lot more expensive. In some cases, they're actually cheaper. There are things you can do. So I just encourage you to kind of look into it, both in board gaming and in other aspects of your life. Used is great. If you haven't looked into the BGG used market, it's amazing. You can get games that are played like maybe once.
Right.
I have bought games off of the BGG used thing for like literally half price, and I opened them up and they weren't punched. So like, that's just one example. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that.
No, that's great. And I guess you focused on the individual and the gamer, and I guess because I work with a lot of the actual companies.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to
produce these goods.
The companies are big too, yeah.
I think there's also a recognition that we there's a lot of different levers to get more sustainable products and to kind of make that more known. And I think as a hobby, we have some different leverage points, but I think the conversations like this on the media, we know. I guess you can tell us, T, a lot of board game publishers probably tune in to a lot of media content to be aware of what's going on. And I think having these conversations like what you're doing, Jonah, is great to keep that up, keep this conversation happening, and have publishers keep seeing that this is an issue. But
yeah.
I will. I'll keep trying.
Greenwashing is still out there as well, and so it's just really keeping the pressure and keep having the conversation in our hobby. And I think hopefully this leads to more conversations.
Yeah.
And I do want to just quickly say there have been other people previously that have tried to start conversations and received similar, if not slightly more harsh results. I just want to call out Storyboard Gamer. He did a whole thing about sustainability in gaming at one point, and I believe he got so fed up with the comments he just abandoned everything on it. So, but continue the conversation. More people are having it, and it definitely. And I just wanted to say, the reason I specifically am talking about consumer stuff more than publisher is because the majority of people that are going to watch this are consumers.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, I appreciate that.
As a publisher, I will tell you, I definitely am 100% open to when people raise concerns about sustainability and environmentalness. We are already instituting changes in how we do things. We're already as environmentally friendly as we could figure out how to be. And we are still improving and having meetings, and we're big and we're slow. So it takes like 18 months to see change, but like there are things in process right now to change how we do things to be more environmentally sustainable. We tried a thing with shrink wrap. Turned out shipping without shrink wrap was worse for the environment and the way that we were doing it. So we're trying to figure out new solutions. There's so much that goes in every conversation, and I can have an entire other episode about shrink wrap at this point.
We should.
Right. Yeah, I think in our hobby, a big thing would be getting, if we could get, and maybe this is where individual consumers have some influence, at least from talking more about it, is if we could start to get a little bit more insights into those impacts. What are those impacts, like we were saying, and maybe getting more information or asking for more information in terms of public disclosures around sustainability within the board game industry. And I think Kickstarter, right now we're benefiting from companies like Kickstarter and Target and Walmart and these other large companies that are getting pressure from investors and others to make sure their supply chain is sustainable, and we're getting this information from publishers now in our hobby who are probably responding to that pool, but I think as individual gamers we should be requesting that same information.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. All right, well, like I said, guys, your input and your insights into these topics are invaluable. So thank you so much for joining me today. And yeah, I feel very encouraged. And anyone that's watching that is a consumer, just, you know, don't be afraid to ask. If you want to find out what your favorite publisher is doing for the environment, shoot them an email, ask them some questions. It's just going to get the ball rolling. So I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.
Please check out the description box to find any links to helpful resources that were discussed in this video today. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a great day.